Fat Spinster's dowry stolen by brother, Mountain Man said, "Your heart is worth more than all gold." $3,000 for that useless spinster? Reginald Pemberton, Jr. snarled, palm slamming the desk so hard the inkwell jumped. "I'll not waste a fortune fattening a future old maid." The word hung in the corridor like smoke. Constance stood just beyond the doorframe with the teapot trembling in her hands, cheeks burning, heart thudding against the bones of a life that had always been too small for her. $3,000 her late mother's promise turned dowry, her one chance at a dress shop in town, a room of her own, a future cut on her measurements and no one else's. She heard the soft, wavering reply of her ailing father and the smooth, oily certainty of her brother's rebuttal. Locks clicked, papers rustled, a key scraped a hidden box. Something precious was being unmade. By nightfall, the deed was done. In the ledger lay a neat lie about investments and interest. In the safe, an emptiness that howled. Connie found it at dawn, the absence of every dollar tucked like winter inside iron. When she faced Reginald, he smiled with the genteel cruelty Goldfield mistook for refinement. "You'll thank me one day," he said, and pushed the kitchen ledger into her hands as if the arithmetic of humiliation might keep the house warm. Snow arrived before the apology that would never come. The town's lamps went dim. Wind braided itself through the pines and rattled the eaves like a warning. Alone in the scullery, Connie stirred a thin pot of soup, the last of the onions sweetening as they surrendered. Shame pressed her ribs. Resolve flickered, small as a match. And then 3 firm knocks at the back door. A figure, tall as a pine and rimmed in snow, filled the threshold. A leather coat steamed in the kitchen's weak heat. A burlap sack hung from one shoulder. The stranger removed his hat, and a pair of ember-warm eyes met hers. "Name's Nathaniel Ironheart," he said, voice like a forge at dusk. "I've coined for a bowl and a chair by your fire, if you've a mind to spare either." Shame shifted. The match brightened. Constance Pemberton had grown used to shrinking inside her own home, though her body broad-hipped, soft, and ample, would never let her truly disappear. At 29, she had outlived the hopeful glances of neighbors and endured the withering smirks of Goldfield's so-called ladies. They called her Miss Left Behind, whispered that she was too heavy for a wedding dress, too plain for a proposal, too bookish for a life outside the kitchen. Her father, frail and coughing blood into his handkerchief, had once been her defender, but illness had stripped him of both strength and authority, leaving Reginald Jr. to thunder through the household with his wife Priscilla on his arm, dispensing scorn like sugar on a bitter pie. Connie became little more than unpaid help polishing floors, washing linens, cooking meals. She was rarely invited to share. The money meant for her independence had vanished into her brother's ventures, and the lie of her reckless spending spread quickly. In Goldfield's narrow streets, whispers trailed her. At the general store, Mrs. Victoria Sterling tapped her fan against her palm and declared within earshot, "A woman who cannot manage her weight will never manage her fortune." Men chuckled. Women turned their faces. Connie left with her basket half empty, cheeks burning hot against the winter wind. It was into this despair that Nathaniel Ironheart stepped, heavy boots leaving melted circles on the kitchen floor. A mountain man by repute, he was said to live among the iron-veined ridges, shaping tools and rails with fire and hammer. Townsfolk called him Iron, for both his trade and the stern set of his shoulders, but in his eyes Connie saw something softer, like coals banked beneath ash. As she ladled soup into a chipped bowl, he studied her with the patient curiosity of a man who had lived long in silence. "You made this?" he asked. She nodded, embarrassed by its thinness. He tasted, closed his eyes, and smiled slow. "Best meal I've had in weeks." It was the first compliment she had heard in months. "Tell me," Nathaniel said, leaning back as the fire warmed his broad frame, "why does a woman with such capable hands look as if she's been carrying stones no one else will lift?" The question broke something in her. She told him haltingly at first, then in a rush, the theft of her dowry, the lies, the laughter behind closed doors, the way she had been reduced to little more than a servant in her own house. Nathaniel listened, jaw tightening, knuckles whitening around the bowl. "That isn't family," he said at last, voice low but edged with steel. "That's theft dressed in blood." Connie shook her head. "It doesn't matter. Without the dowry, I have no chance. No one will ever want me." The mountain man's gaze held hers steady, like a nail driven true. "Then the rest of the world's blind, because I see a woman worth more than every coin your brother ever touched." Her heart fluttered, half with disbelief, half with a dangerous hope. When dawn broke, Connie's heart trembled between terror and liberation. She stood at the back door with a small bundle, just 2 dresses, her mother's worn Bible, and a thimble that had been hers since girlhood. The letter she left on her narrow bed was short, a final defiance against Reginald's theft. "You stole my money, but you will not steal my dignity. I am leaving to make a life where I am not despised." Nathaniel waited by a sturdy wagon, 2 horses steaming into the frosty air. His figure loomed tall, wrapped in a heavy coat lined with sheepskin. "Ready?" he asked simply. Connie hesitated, glancing once more at the only home she had ever known, before nodding. He offered his hand large, roughened by hammer and flame. She took it, and in that moment felt the first flicker of safety she had known in years. The road up Iron Mountain was unforgiving. Snow still clung to the pines, and the path twisted sharply along ridges where icy wind cut through layers of wool. Nathaniel drove the wagon in silence at first, eyes narrowed against the gusts. Connie sat wrapped in a blanket, the cold biting her cheeks, but her spirit strangely lighter. She was leaving behind the whispers, the false debts, the endless humiliation. When the wheels stuck in a drift, Nathaniel leapt down, shoulders straining as he pushed the wagon free. His strength seemed carved from the mountain itself. Later, when they stopped beside a frozen creek, he built a fire with practiced hands, set a small pot above the flames, and handed her a tin cup of broth. "It's thin," he admitted, "but hot." Connie cradled the cup, warmth seeping into her stiff fingers. The steam curled against her face, and she realized with a start that no one had ever stopped work simply to ease her discomfort. She whispered a thank you, and Nathaniel only nodded, as if her gratitude was unnecessary. As night fell, they pitched camp beneath towering firs. Nathaniel spread blankets close to the fire, then stepped away to set his own bedroll at a respectful distance. "You'll be warmer here," he said, eyes avoiding hers. She stared at the flickering light on his face-strong jaw, soot-darkened skin, lashes rimmed with frost, and felt her heart tighten with confusion. Why would a man who could command fire and iron be so careful with a woman the world had dismissed as worthless? Wrapped in her blanket, listening to the crackle of pine logs and the steady rhythm of his breathing, Connie dared to imagine a different life, not one bound by shame or stolen futures, but one shaped by her own choices. Up the mountain lay Ironheart's world, smoke and anvil, wood and stone, but Connie sensed it was more than that. It was a place where she might be seen not as a burden, but as a woman with hands, heart, and worth. By the third day, the path widened into a clearing, and there it was, Iron Mountain Ranch. Smoke curled steadily from a stone chimney, rising against the backdrop of white peaks. The cabin was no crude shelter, it was a fortress of timber and ironwork, each beam joined with the skill of a master craftsman. A blacksmith's forge stood beside the house, its anvil gleaming even in the pale sun. Nathaniel guided the horses into the barn, then lifted Connie's bundle from the wagon. "This is home," he said simply. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like an embrace. The main room was broad, with a heavy table, shelves lined with copper pots, and a fire roaring in the hearth. She noticed small touches, a quilt folded neatly over the settee, a jar of dried lavender on the mantel. It wasn't just a man's cabin, it was a place waiting for companionship. "You'll have this room," Nathaniel said, opening a door to a small chamber. A sturdy bed with a feather mattress stood ready, along with a chest and a washstand. He had even placed a vase of pine boughs by the window. Connie touched the quilt spread across the bed, her throat tightening. No one had ever prepared anything so carefully for her comfort. In the days that followed, a rhythm formed. Nathaniel rose early to tend the forge, hammer echoing through the mountain air. Connie swept the cabin, cooked meals, and mended his shirts. But unlike her life in Goldfield, her work here was not demanded, it was offered freely, and Nathaniel always met it with quiet gratitude. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Connie ladled stew into 2 bowls. She handed his first, but he gently pushed it back. "Ladies eat before Smiths," he said almost shyly. It startled a laugh from her, rusty but genuine, and for a moment the cabin felt less like stone and more like a sanctuary. Sometimes he showed her small tasks in the forge, how to hold the tongs steady, how to recognize the glow of iron ready for shaping. "You've got strong hands," he remarked, as she managed to straighten a glowing bar with his guidance. She flushed. Unused to praise, that wasn't mocking. In turn, she surprised him with ideas for his work, arranging tools for efficiency, suggesting new patterns for hinges and buckles. "You think like a builder," he said one afternoon, wiping soot from his brow. "You see more than most." At night, she would hear the wind clawing at the shutters, but inside the cabin was always warm. Sometimes Nathaniel would place an extra log on the fire and murmur, "So, you don't wake cold?" Small gestures, spoken low, but each one chipped away at the wall of doubt around her heart. Connie had never been courted, never been told she was worthy. Yet here, in this rough-hewn cabin atop Iron Mountain, a man who forged iron with his fists treated her as if she were fragile glass and, paradoxically, as if she were unbreakable. It was in those simple days, supper by the fire, laughter over bent nails, evenings reading aloud from her mother's Bible, that something new began to kindle, not just survival, not just gratitude, but the trembling, dangerous hope of love. The weeks passed swiftly on Iron Mountain, each day weaving Connie more firmly into the fabric of Nathaniel's life. Yet peace rarely lasts unchallenged. Shadows from Goldfield began to climb the mountain, carried by rumor and resentment. It started with a trader who rode through in late spring, bringing supplies. Over stew at the table, he casually mentioned, "Town's buzzing about you, Miss Pemberton. Word is your brother says you ran off with some brute of a Smith after squandering your dowry." Connie's spoon clattered against the bowl. Her cheeks burned. "That's a lie," she whispered. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, the muscles working beneath his beard. He said nothing until the trader left, then turned to her with steady eyes. "You don't have to prove yourself to them, not here, not with me." But the words of her brother gnawed at her heart. At night she dreamed of Reginald's sneer, of Priscilla's cruel laughter, of her father's silent resignation. She feared that even on the mountain she could not escape their judgment. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Nathaniel told her something he had never spoken aloud. "I wasn't always a mountain smith," he said, voice low. "I once ran a forge in Denver, supplied railroads, even government contracts. Men envied me. One night, my workshop was burned to the ground. Rivals claimed I'd cheated them. My name was dragged through mud." He stared into the flames, eyes shadowed. "I left the city before the law could finish what my enemies started. Came here with nothing but my tools. I thought solitude was safer than betrayal." Connie's heart clenched. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, and laid it atop his. "They stole your good name, just as my brother stole my future, but you built this life from ashes, and you gave me a place in it." Nathaniel's hand closed gently over hers, strong and warm. For a moment, silence bound them tighter than words, but danger was closer than either imagined. 2 weeks later, riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, men from Goldfield. At their head was Reginald Pemberton, smug as ever, flanked by hired guns. He sat tall in the saddle, eyes sweeping the cabin like a predator, circling prey. "I've come for what's mine," Reginald called, his voice carrying across the yard. "My sister. She's ruined her name and shamed our family. She doesn't belong with a blacksmith hiding in the hills." Connie's breath caught, but Nathaniel stepped forward, broad shoulders filling the doorway. "She's no longer yours to command," he said evenly. "She's free here, and under my protection." Reginald sneered. "Protection? From a man who bangs iron for a living? She's a fool to cling to you. Give her up, or I'll drag her down this mountain by force, and you'll regret standing in my way." The hired guns shifted in their saddles, hands hovering near revolvers. The air grew taut, a string drawn to breaking. Connie stood just behind Nathaniel, her heart pounding. She knew in that instant this was no longer just about her dowry. It was about dignity, freedom, and the right to choose her own life. And she would not let her brother steal that from her again. The clearing lay silent, except for the restless snorts of Reginald's horses. Snowflakes drifted down from a leaden sky, melting as they touched Nathaniel's broad shoulders. He stood unmoving, like the mountain itself, while Reginald sneered from the saddle. "Last chance, Ironheart," Reginald spat. "Step aside, and maybe I'll let you keep your forge. Otherwise, I'll burn it to the ground just like the city burned you." Connie gasped. Her brother's words struck like a dagger. He had dug into Nathaniel's past, twisting it as a weapon. But Nathaniel's voice was steady, cold as iron pulled from the quench. "You can spread lies all you like, but you won't lay a hand on her." He stepped forward, and the snow crunched under his boots. The hired guns shifted uneasily, their bravado wavering before the quiet certainty in his stance. "Reginald!" Connie cried, finding her voice. She moved to Nathaniel's side, chin lifted, though her knees trembled. You stole from me. You lied about me. You made me a servant in my own home. But you will not take this life from me. Not again. Her brother's face flushed with rage. Ungrateful cow, everything you are, everything you have came from the Pemberton name. No, Connie said, her voice clear, cutting through the cold air. Everything I am came from within me, and from the man who stood by me when my own blood cast me aside. Reginald snapped his fingers. Take her! One of the hired guns urged his horse forward, but Nathaniel was faster. He swung a blacksmith's hammer from his belt, its head gleaming dully in the gray light. With one fluid motion, he struck the earth before the rider, snow and dirt exploding upward. The horse reared, screaming, and the man toppled into the drift. "Any man who wants to take her," Nathaniel growled, his voice carrying like thunder, "will answer to me." The others hesitated, fear plain in their eyes. None of them had the stomach to fight a man who wielded a hammer like an extension of his own soul. Reginald's bluster faltered, but his pride drove him forward. He swung down from his horse, face twisted. "She's mine to command," he shouted, lunging toward Connie. Before Nathaniel could move, Connie stepped forward. With a courage she hadn't known she possessed, she raised her mother's old Bible and struck her brother across the face with a crack that echoed through the clearing. Reginald stumbled, stunned more by her defiance than the blow itself. Blood welled at his lip. For the first time, he saw his sister not as a shadow to control, but as a woman who had chosen her own freedom. "This is my home," Connie said, breath shaking but her gaze unwavering. "And if you ever try to take it from me, I will fight you myself." The hired men backed away. Even Reginald, pale and furious, knew the battle was lost. Muttering curses, he climbed back onto his horse. "You'll regret this," he spat, but the threat rang hollow. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men trailing behind like a broken shadow. As the sound of hooves faded, silence returned to the mountain. Connie sagged, but Nathaniel's arm came around her, steady and sure. "You were brave," he murmured, his voice thick with pride. "You didn't need me to fight for you. You fought for yourself." She looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "I fought because you showed me I was worth fighting for." That night, the forge at Iron Mountain glowed like a beacon against the endless dark. Inside, the fire hummed low, casting amber light across the log walls. Nathaniel sat at the long wooden table, mending a set of tongs, while Connie ladled stew into 2 bowls. Her hands still trembled faintly from the confrontation, but there was a new steadiness in her heart. They ate in silence at first, each sip of broth a comfort after the storm. Outside, the wind clawed at the shutters, but within, the cabin breathed warmth. Connie looked around at the shelves lined with her handiwork, at the forge tools gleaming in the corner, at the room Nathaniel had built for her as if he had been waiting his whole life. "This place," she whispered, her voice soft but sure, "it finally feels like home." Nathaniel set aside his spoon, his eyes meeting hers. "It is your home, if you'll have it, if you'll have me." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. Connie's throat tightened, tears welling in her eyes. She had been betrayed by blood, mocked by society, cast aside by the very people who should have cherished her. And yet here, in the heart of the mountain, she had found more than shelter. She had found a partner who saw her not her size, not her shame, not the lies told about her, but her. She reached across the table, placing her hand atop his calloused one. I already chose you, Nathaniel, the moment I stepped through this door. He squeezed her hand gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Then we'll face whatever comes together. The wind howled louder, but inside the cabin the fire burned strong, two shadows leaning close in its glow. And though the world beyond Iron Mountain still carried whispers, debts, and dangers, here in this fragile, flickering circle of light, they had carved out a place where love was stronger than betrayal. The question remained, lingering like the hush of snow. Would their love be enough to stand against all that waited beyond the mountain? Every time I finish telling a story like this, I'm reminded that the harshest betrayals don't always have the last word. Sometimes it's love, the quiet, patient kind, that rises from the ashes of humiliation and builds something lasting. Connie's journey was not just about losing her dowry or being mocked by her own family. It was about finding the one person who looked past all of that and saw the worth within her heart. And maybe that's why these stories stay with us. Because no matter where you are in the world, whether you're listening in the stillness of night or on a busy street, we all long to be seen for who we truly are. So let me ask you, where are you listening from tonight? Tell me in the comments, because every time I see your words, I'm reminded how these tales connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. And if you still believe in love, love that heals, that defies shame, that gives second chances, then don't go anywhere. The next story waiting for you will prove it once again.